The most dangerous man in New Jersey sat alone in a corner booth, haunted by ghosts of his own making, when a 6-year-old with a pink bow and a chocolate chip cookie looked past his $1,000 suit and saw something he'd forgotten existed, a human being worth saving. Marco Santoro had killed his first man at 24. By 41, he'd lost count, not because the number was so high he couldn't track it, but because at some point the bodies had stopped being people and started being problems solved. Mathematics, not murder, or so he told himself. Tonight, the rain against La Rosanera's windows sounded like applause at a funeral, enthusiastic but ultimately meaningless. He sat in his usual corner booth, the one Tommy Rixey kept perpetually reserved, with a handwritten riservato card that might as well have read, "Reserved for Ghosts." The espresso had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Marco hadn't noticed. His phone vibrated for the 14th time in an hour. Carmine, probably, with updates on the Atlantic City situation. Or maybe Sal, calling about Danny again, about the lawyer fees, about how they could fix this, like his nephew's arrest was a leaky faucet instead of a symptom of a disease Marco had spent 2 decades spreading through his family like a plague, with an Italian accent. He'd built an empire, what a joke. Empires had culture, art, philosophy. What Marco had built was a sophisticated extortion racket wrapped in expensive suits and blood money charity donations that let him sleep at night. Except lately, he wasn't sleeping much at all. Vincent's funeral was Saturday. Closed casket, obviously. When you betray the architect, there isn't enough left for an open casket. Marco had authorized the hit himself, watched the surveillance footage of his oldest friend singing to the feds, and made the call with the same emotional investment most people brought to ordering pizza. Pepperoni with extra betrayal, please. But no. Sitting alone with only his reflection and regrets for company, he wondered, when exactly had he become the monster his sister saw? Had it been gradual, like aging, or had there been a specific moment when Marco Santoro, business school dropout with dreams of legitimate success, had died and the architect had been born? "Are you okay?" The voice was small, curious, completely unafraid, which was how Marco knew he was either having a stroke or hallucinating. People didn't approach him without fear. Fear was his brand, his currency, the invisible fence that kept the world at a safe distance. He looked up. A little girl stood beside his booth, maybe 6 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a pink bow that matched her dress. She held a half-eaten chocolate chip cookie in one hand and regarded him with the kind of direct, unflinching attention that children have before the world teaches them to look away from uncomfortable things. "Are you okay?" she repeated, as if she'd genuinely asked a simple question and was patiently waiting for a simple answer. Marco opened his mouth, closed it. In 41 years, including 18 years of running the most feared crime family in New Jersey, nobody had ever asked him that question. Not once, not even his wife before the divorce, before she'd taken Isabella and disappeared to California with a settlement large enough to ensure her silence and her distance. He started, then stopped, because the truth was complicated and lies seemed inappropriate in the face of such sincere concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Shouldn't you be with your parents?" She considered this, taking a bite of her cookie. "Probably, but you looked sad, so I wanted to check." She said it matter-of-factly, like checking on sad strangers was item 3 on her evening to-do list, right after finishing cookies and before bedtime. Across the restaurant, Marco could see a young couple at a table near the kitchen. The woman was black. Elegant, wearing nursing scrubs like she'd come straight from a shift. The man beside her was gesturing animatedly, probably mid-story, completely oblivious to his daughter's absence. "Your parents are worried," Marco said, though they clearly weren't, which somehow made the moment more surreal. "They're talking about boring grown-up stuff," the girl said with the dismissive certainty of someone who'd suffered through too many adult conversations. "I'm Sophie. What's your name?" "Marco." "That's a nice name." She took another bite of cookie, regarding him thoughtfully. "You have sad eyes, Marco, like my teacher Mr. Peterson after his dog died. Do you have a dog?" Despite everything, the weight of Vincent's betrayal, Maria's rejection, Danny's arrest, the empire crumbling under its own moral bankruptcy, Marco felt something crack in his chest. Not break, exactly. Crack, like ice at the start of spring. "No," he said quietly, "no dog." "That's probably why you're sad, Sophie," announced with the confident diagnostic ability of someone who'd clearly solved the problem. "Everyone needs a dog or a cat or a fish, something to take care of. Otherwise you're just alone, and being alone is sad." From the mouths of babes, Marco thought, came the kind of truth that 800-an-hour therapists took 6 months to dance around. "I'm not alone," Marco said, which was technically true. He had 3 armed men outside, a crew of 30 soldiers, business associates across 5 states, and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with people who needed him to solve their problems, approve their hits, arbitrate their disputes. What he didn't have was a single person who gave a damn whether he was okay. Sophie tilted her head, unconvinced. You're sitting by yourself in a restaurant looking sad, that's alone. She held out what remained of her cookie. One half, cookies help with sadness, it's science. Marco stared at the offering, a chocolate chip cookie with tiny fingerprints. Pressed into it, warm and slightly melted, offered with the kind of generosity that expected nothing in return. When was the last time someone had given him something without wanting something back, without fear or calculation or agenda? That's very kind, he said carefully, but that's your cookie. I already ate most of it, Sophie pointed out with flawless logic, and you need it more than me, I'm not sad. Before Marco could respond, a voice called out across the restaurant, Sophie, Sophie. The woman in scrubs was on her feet now, scanning the restaurant with the rising panic of a parent who'd looked away for 30 seconds and found their child vanished. Her companion had stood too, already moving toward the kitchen, both of them a heartbeat away from full emergency mode. Your mom's looking for you, Marco said. Sophie glanced back unconcerned. That's just mom being mom, she worries about everything. Last week she freaked out because I climbed a tree, but I didn't. Even fall, she turned back to Marco, still holding out the cookie fragment. So, do you want it or not? Marco Santoro, the architect, the man who'd ordered 17 hits in the last 3 years alone, who'd built an empire on fear and blood and ruthless efficiency, carefully took the piece of cookie from a 6-year-old girl's hand. Thank you, he said, and meant it more than any words he'd spoken in months. Sophie beamed like he'd just made her entire week. You're welcome, see, already less sad, cookies are magic like that. Sophie, the mother, had spotted them now, rushing over with a mixture of relief and confusion. Baby, you can't just wander away. She stopped short as she reached the booth, seeing her daughter standing beside Marco, who must have looked exactly like what he was, a dangerous man in an expensive suit holding a child's cookie like it was a live grenade. I'm so sorry, the woman said quickly, reaching for Sophie. We looked away for one second. Mom, this is Marco, Sophie interrupted cheerfully. He was sad, so I gave him part of my cookie. It's helping. The woman, late 20s, tired eyes that spoke of long shifts and longer worries, protective hand on her daughter's shoulder, looked at Marco with the wariness of someone who'd learned to read danger. And Marco, who'd spent 18 years cultivating an aura of menace, suddenly wanted nothing more than to not be frightening to this child who'd offered him kindness. It's fine, he said, setting the cookie fragment on the table. She was just being kind. You have a good kid. The best kid, the woman agreed, but she was already pulling Sophie back, creating distance, her instincts screaming what her daughter's innocence couldn't perceive. Sophie waved as she was led away. Bye, Marco, remember, get a dog, or at least another cookie. And then she was gone, returned to her table where her father, who'd been oblivious to the entire exchange, was pulling out his wallet to pay the check. The woman kept glancing back at Marco, that protective mama bear assessment that read him exactly right, dangerous, damaged, wrong. But Sophie looked back too, and waved again, and smiled like Marco was just another person in the world who needed a cookie and some company. Marco sat alone in his booth, staring at the piece of chocolate chip cookie on the table. His phone buzzed again. Carmine, definitely. The Atlantic City situation wouldn't solve itself. There were decisions to make, messages to send, the machinery of empire that required constant feeding with violence and fear. He picked up the cookie fragment and ate it. It tasted like childhood, like his grandmother's kitchen before the business consumed everything, like a world where kindness existed without calculation, and people asked if you were okay because they genuinely cared about the answer. What if we're all just one kind word away from remembering we're human? The thought lodged in his brain like a splinter. When was the last time you asked someone if they were truly okay and actually waited for an honest answer? Marco pulled out his phone. 17 messages from Carmen, 3 from Sal, 1 from his lawyer about Danny, another from the accountant about the quarterly reports, all of it urgent, all of it important, all of it feeding the machine he'd built that consumed lives and spit out profit margins. He looked at Sophie's table. The family was leaving now, the father holding the door while the mother ushered Sophie through, one hand protectively on their daughter's back. A normal family having a normal dinner, heading home to their normal life where the biggest drama was probably whether Sophie would brush her teeth without being asked. Marco had killed men for less than looking at him wrong, had destroyed families, shattered lives, built his empire on the ruins of better people's dreams. And a 6-year-old with a pink bow had seen straight through it all too. Ask the one question nobody else dared, are you okay? The answer was no, he wasn't okay. Hadn't been okay in so long he'd forgotten what okay felt like. His phone buzzed again, he ignored it. Tommy Rixai appeared at his booth, nervous as always. Mr. Santoro, can I get you anything else? Some dinner, fresh espresso. No, Marco said quietly. Then, because Sophie's kindness was still echoing in his head, thank you, Tommy, the espresso was perfect. Tommy blinked, caught off guard by gratitude from a man who typically communicated in grunts and silences. Of course, Mr. Santoro, any time. As Tommy retreated, Marco stared at the smudge of chocolate on the table where Sophie's cookie fragment had been. Such a small thing, such an enormous thing. Marco didn't go home that night. Home was a penthouse in Manhattan that cost more per month than most people made in a year, filled with furniture his decorator had chosen and art he'd never looked at twice. Home was a mausoleum where he slept alone and woke up alone, and spent his hours between sleeping and waking being alone with ghosts. Instead, he drove. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under streetlights. His driver, Pete, had looked confused when Marco dismissed him and took the keys to the Mercedes himself, but Pete had learned long ago not to question the architect's decisions. Marco ended up at the cemetery where his father was buried. Vittorio the Viper Santoro, 1944-1998, loving father and husband. The gravestone didn't mention the bodies, the bribes, the politicians in his pocket, or the empire built on breaking people. Death came with excellent PR. You'd be proud, Marco said to the marble headstone. I did everything you taught me, built it bigger than you ever did, more territory, more money, more fear. He laughed bitter. And a 6-year-old just asked me if I was okay, and I couldn't answer her because I don't even know anymore. The cemetery offered no response, which was probably for the best. If his father's ghost had appeared with advice, it would have been the same sermon Marco had heard his whole life. Power respects only power. Compassion is weakness. The strong devour the weak, so be strong. Strong, right. Marco felt about as strong as the crumbling autumn leaves scattered across his father's grave. His phone rang, not a text this time, an actual call. Carmine's name lit up the screen. Marco answered. Where are you? Carmine sounded stressed, which meant something had gone wrong. We got a situation. What kind of situation? The kind where Tommy D'Angelo's crew hit our warehouse in Newark, took out 3 of our guys, made off with $200,000 in merchandise. This is a declaration, Marco. They're testing us. Tommy D'Angelo, small-time operator with big-time ambitions, always sniffing around the edges of Santoro territory like a hyena waiting for the lion to show weakness. 2 weeks ago, Marco would have already been planning the response, hit them hard, hit them fast, make an example so spectacular that nobody would question Santoro power for another decade. Marco, you there? I'm here. So what do? I got the boys ready to move. Just say the word and Tommy D'Angelo becomes a memory by sunrise. Marco closed his eyes, saw Sophie's face, heard her voice, you have sad eyes, saw Vincent's closed casket, saw his nephew Danny in a holding cell, desperate to prove himself to an uncle who'd shown him nothing but violence dressed up as strength, saw his sister Maria in Tuscany, refusing to even speak to him because he'd become the monster she couldn't bear to watch destroy himself. Are you okay? No, he wasn't okay, and more violence, more bodies, more fear wasn't going to make him okay. It was just going to add more ghosts to the collection haunting him. Marco, talk to me. Set up a meeting, Marco said quietly. Silence on the other end, then a meeting with Tommy D'Angelo after he hit our warehouse. Marco will look weak. Set up the meeting, Carmine, neutral ground, tomorrow night. Tell him I want to talk business. Business, Marco, what the hell is going on? This isn't how we do things. Yeah, Marco said, staring at his father's grave. I know, set up the meeting. He hung up before Carmine could argue further. The phone immediately started buzzing with texts. Carmine, probably, along with half the crew who'd be hearing about this decision within minutes. The architect wants to talk. The architect who solved problems with surgical violence wanted to have a conversation. Marco turned off his phone. He sat there in the cemetery until dawn started painting the eastern sky pink and gold. Somewhere in the city, Sophie was probably waking up, getting ready for school, maybe telling her parents about the sad man at the restaurant she'd shared her cookie with. living a normal life in a normal world where kindness wasn't a weakness and asking if someone was okay wasn't a revolutionary act. Marco had spent 18 years being his father's son, building the empire, playing the role, becoming the architect, the man too feared to approach, too dangerous to question, too powerful to need anyone. And where had it gotten him, sitting alone in a graveyard, so numb to his own humanity that a child's simple kindness had cracked him open like an egg? The meeting with Tommy D'Angelo was set for Friday night at a social club in Newark, neutral territory, both sides bringing 3 men, no weapons allowed inside. The kind of sit-down that happened when bosses wanted to negotiate rather than annihilate. Carmine had spent the previous 2 days looking at Marco like he'd grown a second head. "This is a mistake," he said for the 40th time as they drove to Newark. "Tommy hit us, killed our guys, took our property. We respond with overwhelming force. That's the rule. That's always been the rule." "Rules change," Marco said. "Not these rules, not our rules." In the backseat, Sal, Marco's younger brother, Danny's father, cleared his throat. "Marco, I gotta agree with Carmine here. This looks like weakness. Every crew from here to Philadelphia is watching if we don't respond." "Then what?" Marco turned to face his brother. "Then what, Sal? We kill Tommy D'Angelo and his crew, send a message written in blood, and next month someone else tests us and we kill them too. And the month after that, how many bodies until we feel safe? How many funerals until we feel strong?" Sal and Carmine exchanged glances, the kind of look that said their boss had finally cracked under pressure. "It's not about feeling safe," Carmine said carefully. "It's about survival. It's about making sure nobody thinks they can take what's ours." "And Danny," Marco asked, watching his brother flinch, "was he trying to survive when he started dealing pills, or was he trying to be like us, trying to earn respect the way we taught him?" Sal's jaw tightened. "That's different." How is it different? We built this empire on violence and fear and told ourselves it was for family, for security, for respect. And now my nephew, your son, is in juvie because he learned the lesson too well." Marco shook his head. "So yeah, maybe the rules need to change. Maybe before we bury anyone else, we try something different." The social club was exactly what Marco expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, old men playing cards in the corner pretending not to watch. Tommy D'Angelo sat at a table in the back, flanked by 2 guys who probably thought they looked intimidating in their track suits and gold chains. Tommy himself was late 40s, thick around the middle, with the kind of face that permanently looked like he'd just sucked on a lemon. He stood when Marco entered, making a show of spreading his arms wide. "The architect himself, this is an honor. I gotta admit, when I heard you wanted to talk instead of you know the usual Santoro welcome wagon, I was surprised." Marco sat down without preamble. Carmine and Sal flanked him, tension radiating off them like heat off asphalt in summer. "You hit my warehouse," Marco said. "Killed 3 of my men, took my property." Tommy's smile didn't waver. "Business is business, you understand. Territory's been a little unclear lately. Figured I'd clarify things." "By killing people." "By taking what I thought was available." Tommy leaned back, confident. "Word is, the architect's been distracted lately. Vincent turning rat, your sister cutting you off, your nephew in lockup. People talk. They wonder if maybe the Santoro Empire is showing some cracks." Marco felt Carmine tense beside him, could sense his consigliere preparing for violence. The old Marco, the one from a week ago, would have already reached across the table, would have made Tommy D'Angelo regret every word, every breath, every decision that led to this moment. But he kept seeing Sophie's face, kept hearing her voice. "Are you okay?" "You're right," Marco said quietly. Tommy blinked. "What?" "You're right, I've been distracted, been building this empire for 18 years, and somewhere along the way I forgot why I was building it, forgot what it costs, what it takes from everyone around me." Marco leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to return my property, every dollar. You're going to compensate the families of the men you killed. And then we're going to draw new territory lines, clear ones, fair ones." Tommy's smile had vanished. "And if I don't?" "Then we go to war," Marco said simply. "And you'll win or I'll win, and either way more people die. More families get funerals, more kids grow up thinking violence is the only language that matters." He paused. "Or you could take the deal, build your territory, run your business, and we both walk away from this table alive and richer than if we'd spent the next 6 months trying to kill each other." The silence stretched like taffy. Tommy D'Angelo looked at his men, then back at Marco, clearly trying to figure out if this was a trap, a trick, or genuine insanity. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Marco stood, You've got 24 hours to decide. Return the money and the merchandise to Carmen by tomorrow night, or don't. But understand, if you choose war, I won't hold back. I'm offering peace because I'm tired of funerals, not because I'm weak." He turned and walked out, Carmen and Sal scrambling to follow. The ride back to Manhattan was silent for exactly 3 minutes before Carmine exploded. "What the hell was that?" He twisted in the passenger seat to stare at Marco. "You just gave Tommy D'Angelo permission to think we're weak. By tomorrow, every crew from Boston to Baltimore will hear that the architect negotiated after getting hit. We'll have sharks circling before the weekend." Marco stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. "Maybe." Maybe, Carmine's voice climbed an octave. "Marco, I've been with you for 12 years, watched you build this empire from the ground up after your father died, and in 12 years you know what made us strong: fear, respect, the certainty that crossing the Santoros meant annihilation. You just threw that away for what? A conversation." "For a chance," Marco said quietly. Sal spoke up from the backseat. "A chance at what, Marco? At looking soft, at getting us all killed when Tommy decides to push harder because he thinks we can't push back." Marco finally looked at them both, at being something other than what we are, at stopping the cycle before Danny ends up like Vincent, either dead or in federal custody singing to save himself, at not becoming exactly what Papa was so that when I die, my gravestone can say something other than he built an empire on corpses. Carmine opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "That little girl really got to you, didn't?" "Yeah," Marco admitted. "She did. You know why? Because she looked at me and saw a person, not the architect, not a weapon, just someone who needed a cookie and some kindness. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone looked at me that way, the last time I felt like anything other than the sum of my violence." "We're in the life," Sal said. "It's who we are. You can't just walk away from it because some kid gave you a cookie." "I'm not walking away, I'm choosing a different direction." Marco's phone, which he turned back on despite his better judgment, buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. He answered it. "Yeah." "Mr. Santoro," a woman's voice, familiar but uncertain. This is Janelle Morrison from the restaurant, Sophie's mom." Marco sat up straighter. "Ms. Morrison, is everything okay? Is Sophie?" "Sophie's fine, actually, that's why I'm calling." A pause. "She hasn't stopped talking about you, about the sad man at the restaurant who needed a cookie, and normally I'd tell her to forget about strangers, but..." Another pause, longer this time. "Look, I'm a nurse, I work in the ER, I see a lot of people at their worst: overdoses, violence, desperation, and I've learned to read people pretty well. So when my 6-year-old daughter approached a man who was clearly dangerous, I was terrified." "I understand," Marco said carefully. "I would never have hurt her." "I know, that's the weird part, I could see it. You were dangerous, but not to her, never to her." Janelle took a breath. "Sophie made me promise to call you. She said you looked too sad to be left alone, and if I didn't make sure you were okay, she'd worry. So against every instinct I have, I tracked down the restaurant owner, and he gave me your number, and now I'm calling a man who's clearly connected to ask if he's all right because my daughter won't sleep until she knows the sad man got more than just half a cookie." Despite everything, the tension with Carmine, the gamble with Tommy D'Angelo, the empire potentially crumbling around him, Marco smiled. "She's worried about me. Obsessively, it's driving her father crazy. Did the sad man get a dog? Did someone give him more cookies? Does he have friends to check on him? We've had the same conversation 17 times since Thursday." Janelle's voice softened. "So I'm calling to tell her I checked on you. Are you okay, Mr. Santoro?" And there it was again, that question. The one that had cracked him open in the restaurant, the one that had changed everything. "I'm working on it," Marco said honestly. "Tell Sophie, tell her the cookie helped more than she knows, and tell her I'm trying to make better choices, the kind that don't make people sad." "I'll tell her." A pause. "Mr. Santoro, I don't know what you do, I don't want to know, but whatever it is, whatever darkness you're carrying, my daughter saw something worth saving in you. Maybe you should listen to." The call ended. Carmine was staring at him. Was that the kid's mother checking on me because Sophie was worried? Marco shook his head, amazed. "A 6-year-old I met once is worried about whether I'm okay." "And are you," Sal asked quietly, "okay?" Marco thought about it, about Vincent's betrayal and Maria's rejection and Danny's arrest, about 18 years of violence and fear and building an empire that consumed everyone it touched, about a little girl with a pink bow who'd offered kindness without agenda, without fear, without anything except genuine human concern. "No," he said, "but maybe I can be, maybe we all can be." 24 hours later, Carmine called with news. Tommy D'Angelo returned everything, the money, the merchandise, even a little extra for the families, says he'll meet tomorrow to discuss new territory lines. Carmine sounded amazed and suspicious in equal measure. I don't understand it. We showed what he thought was weakness, and instead of pushing, he backed down. Because it wasn't weakness, Marco said, it was strength. The hardest kind, the kind that chooses peace when violence is easier. Yeah, well, the rest of the families are talking. Not all of it's good. Some people think you've gone soft. Joey Carboni's crew is making noise about maybe it's time for new leadership. Let them talk. If Joey wants to make a move, he knows where to find me. But Carmen, Marco paused, start reaching out to the other families. Not threats, not shows of force, just conversations. About how we could all make more money with less bloodshed. About how maybe the old ways don't have to be the only ways. You're really doing this. You're really trying to change the entire structure. I'm trying to change before the structure collapses and buries us all. Marco looked out his office window at the Manhattan skyline. And if it doesn't work, if they all come for us, then at least I'll know I tried, that I was more than just another monster in an expensive suit. 3 weeks later, Marco stood outside PS 124 in Brooklyn, feeling more nervous than he'd felt facing down rival crews or federal investigations. The school day was ending, kids pouring out in chaotic waves of backpacks and screaming joy. He spotted Sophie immediately, pink bow of course, backpack covered in unicorn stickers. She was holding her mother's hand, chattering about something with the intensity only 6-year-olds could manage. Then she saw him, her entire face lit up. Marco, she broke free from Janelle and ran over, skidding to a stop in front of him. You came. Mom said you might be too busy, but you came. I came, Marco confirmed. He'd spent the last 3 weeks making radical changes to his business, pushing for negotiations over violence, for cooperation over conquest. Some families were listening, others were waiting to see if this was a trick or genuine transformation. Joey Carboni's crew had made threats but no actual moves. The empire hadn't collapsed, yet. But more importantly, he'd reached out to Maria, called her in Tuscany, apologized, told her she was right about everything. They'd talked for 3 hours. She was coming to visit next month. It was a start. And he'd hired the best lawyers money could buy for Danny. Got him into a program instead of juvie, therapy instead of punishment. His nephew was angry, confused, but starting to understand that his uncle was trying to save him from the life, not initiate him into it. Small steps, baby steps, steps toward being okay. I got you something, Marco said, pulling out a wrapped package. Sophie tore into it with the enthusiasm of a natural-born gift opener. Inside was a framed photo, a golden retriever puppy with impossibly floppy ears and an expression of pure joy. A dog, Sophie shrieked. You got a dog. Well, I'm in the process of getting a dog. That's Charlie. I pick him up next week. Figured you were right. Everyone needs someone to take care of. Someone who thinks you're the best person in the world, even when you're not sure you deserve it. Sophie hugged the frame to her chest, then looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes. Are you still sad? Less sad than I was, Marco said honestly, thanks to you. Janelle had approached cautiously, that protective mother energy radiating off her, but she was smiling. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you. She tells everyone she saved a man with a cookie. Her teacher thinks it's a metaphor. It kind of is, Marco said. He knelt down to Sophie's level. You asked me if I was okay, and nobody had asked me that in a very long time. It made me realize I wasn't okay, and that maybe I could be if I made different choices, better choices. You helped me see that. Sophie considered this seriously, so the cookie worked. The cookie worked, you worked, your kindness worked. Marco stood, pulling an envelope from his pocket and handing it to Janelle. This is for Sophie's college fund, for raising a kid who sees people instead of monsters, who asks strangers if they're okay and means it. Janelle opened the envelope, saw the check, and her eyes went wide. Mr. Santoro, this is too much. I can't. You can consider it payment for services rendered. Your daughter saved my life. That's worth more than money, but money's what I have to give. He smiled. Besides, anyone who can change the trajectory of a man's entire existence with half a cookie deserves to have her college paid for. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. Will you come visit Charlie when you get him? I want to meet him. Marco looked at Janelle, questioning. She studied him for a long moment, this dangerous man her daughter had decided to save, and slowly nodded. Yeah, Marco said to Sophie. Yeah, I'll bring Charlie to meet you, and maybe we can all get cookies, the kind that help with sadness. It's science. Sophie agreed solemnly. As Marco walked back to his car, his phone buzzed. A text from Carmen: 3 more families want to meet. Everyone's talking about the new Centauro approach. Joey Carboni's crew backed down. This might actually work. Marco smiled. It wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, pushback, people who wanted the old ways, who thought peace was weakness and violence was the only language worth speaking. Some nights he'd probably still sit alone wondering if he'd made the right choice, still carry ghosts, still battle the darkness. But he'd have Charlie, he'd have Maria speaking to him again, he'd have Danny in therapy instead of prison, he'd have a chance, however slim, at becoming something other than the architect. And he'd have the memory of a 6-year-old with a pink bow who'd looked at one of the most dangerous men in New Jersey and asked, with genuine concern and zero fear, "Are you okay?" 3 words, 1 cookie, a lifetime of difference. Marco got in his car and drove toward his Manhattan office, where 18 years of empire building waited to be slowly, carefully transformed into something that didn't require quite so many funerals. It wouldn't happen overnight. Real change never did, but it would happen, had to happen. Because a little girl had shared her cookie and reminded him that underneath the suits and the reputation and the body count, he was still human, still capable of being saved, still deserving of the question that had changed everything. "Are you okay?" And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marco Santoro thought maybe, eventually, he could be. The rain had started again, gentle this time, washing the city clean. Marco turned on the radio, jazz, something hopeful with a saxophone, and drove toward whatever came next. Behind him, Sophie waved goodbye until he disappeared around the corner, already planning what she'd teach Charlie about kindness when they met. After all, everyone needed saving. Sometimes, even architects, especially architects,